There's a Swiss psychiatrist who spent the last 20 years of his life mostly alone in a stone tower he built with his own hands on the edge of a lake with no electricity, no running water, and no phone. His name was Carl Jung, and he said those years were the most important of his entire existence. Now, here's the part nobody talks about. What he discovered in that silence is the exact thing modern science is now begging you to understand about staying home. We've been sold a lie, a very expensive, very loud, very well-marketed lie. The lie is that if you're not out there, grinding, networking, hustling, showing up at every event, taking every meeting, saying yes to every invitation, you're falling behind. That the person alone in their apartment on a Friday night is the loser. That solitude is a symptom of failure. But here's what Jung figured out almost 100 years ago, sitting in that stone tower in Bollingen. The person who cannot be alone with themselves is the one who's actually lost. Everyone else is just running from their own reflection. And I'm going to prove it to you, not with vibes, not with quotes on a black screen with piano music, with actual psychology, actual neuroscience, and the actual life of a man who might be the most misunderstood thinker of the 20th century. Because by the end of this, you're going to understand why the greatest gift you can give yourself, your career, your relationships, your sanity, is the thing everyone told you was pathetic: staying home. Quick thing before we get into it. When Jung was 38 years old, he had what most people would call a full nervous breakdown. He hallucinated, he heard voices, he saw visions of Europe drowning in blood, which, by the way, was 1913, 1 year before World War I. He was so unstable that his colleagues thought he was finished. Freud, his mentor, had already cut him off. His career was in ruins. So what did he do? Did he go to more parties? Did he put himself out there? Did he network his way back to relevance? No, he went home. He locked the door, and for the next 6 years he essentially became a hermit in his own house, writing, drawing, talking to himself, digging through his own mind like an archaeologist. That period produced the ideas that made him one of the most influential psychologists in human history. The shadow, the collective unconscious, archetypes, individuation. All of it came from a man who chose to stay home when the world was telling him to snap out of it. Hold on to that. Point 1. The myth of out there. Let's talk about the biggest lie in modern culture, the idea that the answers are somewhere outside of you. Every ad you see is built on this premise: buy the trip, attend the retreat, join the mastermind, move to the city, find the tribe, meet the person. And look, I'm not saying travel is bad or meeting people is bad. I'm saying we've built an entire economy on the assumption that whatever is missing in you can be filled by something out there. Jung called this the extroverted attitude gone off the rails. He didn't mean extroversion in the personality test sense. He meant a whole civilization that had lost the ability to look inward. A culture obsessed with what he called the object, status, image, achievement, other people's approval, at the total expense of the subject, which is you, your inner world, your soul, if you want to use that word. And here's the tragic part. The more you chase out there, the emptier in here becomes, because you're feeding a self that isn't yours. You're building a life for a character you invented to survive middle school. Studies from the University of Virginia found that most people would rather give themselves an electric shock than sit alone in a quiet room for 15 minutes with nothing but their thoughts. Read that again. We'd rather physically hurt ourselves than be alone with our own minds. That's not freedom. That's a psychological emergency dressed up as a lifestyle. Now, before you close this and go doom scroll, let me tell you what happened when Jung finally stopped running. He started keeping a journal, but not a normal journal. He drew in it. He painted. He wrote in Latin. He had conversations with figures from his own unconscious. He called it the Red Book, and for almost a century, nobody was allowed to see it. When it was finally published in 2009, scholars called it one of the most important unpublished works in the history of psychology. He wrote the whole thing alone, at home, in silence. Everything you're chasing at the networking event, he found by sitting still. Point 2. The neuroscience of staying home. Okay, let's get scientific for a second, because this is where it gets wild. Your brain has something called the default mode network. It's a network of regions that only lights up when you're not focused on the outside world, when you're daydreaming, showering, staring at the ceiling, doing nothing. For decades, neuroscientists thought this network was just static, the brain idling. Turns out it's the opposite. The default mode network is where memory consolidation happens. It's where creative insight happens. It's where you construct your sense of self. In other words, the thing that makes you you is only online when you're alone and unstimulated. Now guess what shuts it down? Notifications, social media, constant novelty, being out there all the time. There's research from Harvard University showing that people who spend more time in unfocused, undirected mental states, literally sitting there letting their mind wander, score higher on measures of creativity, self-awareness, and emotional regulation. And Jung intuited all of this decades before we had brain scans. He wrote, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." That's not a Pinterest quote. That's neuroscience wearing a bow tie. Staying home isn't laziness. It's letting the most important part of your brain finally do its job. Quick thing. I know what some of you are thinking. But I get lonely. I get anxious when I'm alone. Being home makes me spiral. Good. I mean it. That's actually a great sign. That means there's something in there that needs your attention. Jung had a phrase for what happens when you avoid this. He said, neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering, meaning the anxiety, the restlessness, the compulsion to always be doing something. That's not the real problem. That's your mind's smokescreen for the real problem, which is something you haven't sat with yet. The bar, the scroll, the endless plans, it's all avoidance dressed up as living. Stay with me. It gets better.
Point 3. The shadow. This is Jung's most famous idea, and it's the reason most people can't stand being alone. Jung believed that every one of us has a shadow, not a metaphor, a real, functional part of your personality that contains everything you've rejected about yourself. The anger you were told wasn't ladylike, the ambition you were told was arrogant, the sadness you were told to get over, the desires you were told were shameful. All of that gets locked in a psychological basement, and your entire adult life is spent above ground, pretending it doesn't exist. But here's the catch. Jung said the shadow doesn't disappear. It runs your life from the basement. It's why you snap at your partner over something small. It's why you're jealous of that person online you've never met. It's why you self-sabotage right before things go well. And the only way to deal with the shadow, the only way, is to be alone long enough to actually meet it. You cannot integrate your shadow at a bar. You cannot integrate it in a group chat. You cannot integrate it at brunch. You have to go home, close the door, and let it show up. Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Everyone wants the light version of self-improvement, the morning routines, the affirmations, the vision boards. Jung is telling you the real work is the opposite direction. It's downward, inward, alone. And the people who do this work, the ones who actually sit with themselves, they become almost unrecognizable, calmer, less reactive, weirdly magnetic, because they're no longer at war with themselves. Everyone else can feel it, even if they can't explain it. Okay, quick reset. If you're still with me, you're already ahead of 99% of people, because most humans literally cannot make it this far into a conversation about themselves without pulling out their phone. Here's a fun fact. The average person now checks their phone 144 times a day. That's roughly once every 10 waking minutes. Jung never owned a phone, never used the internet, and produced 20 volumes of collected works, painted, sculpted, ran a psychiatric practice, and built a stone tower by hand. You're not too busy, you're too stimulated. There's a difference. Point 4. Individuation. This is the big one. This is the concept Jung dedicated his entire life to. Individuation. He described it as the process of becoming who you actually are, as opposed to who your parents wanted you to be, who your culture told you to be, who your ex expected you to be, who your algorithm shaped you to be. Jung believed that most people go their entire lives without ever meeting themselves. They live and die as a collage of other people's expectations, and they can't figure out why nothing ever feels quite right. Individuation is the work of pulling all those threads apart, figuring out what's yours and what was installed. And that work, again, requires solitude. Not a weekend of solitude, not a silent retreat you post about. Ongoing, unglamorous, unphotographable, boring solitude. Evenings alone, weekends alone, long stretches of your life where nothing exciting is happening on the outside, because everything important is happening on the inside. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Notice the word privilege, not the obligation, not the goal, the privilege, because most people never get there. And the reason they don't is they can't sit still long enough to hear their own voice under the noise. Staying home is not a punishment. It's the price of admission for the only project that actually matters, becoming a real person. Here's a wild detail from Jung's life. In that stone tower at Bollingen, he had no electricity his entire life there. He cooked on wood stove, he pumped water by hand, he carved stone, he wrote by oil lamp. People asked him why. He said, "In Bollingen, I am in the midst of my true life. I am most deeply myself."
He wasn't roughing it out as a wellness stunt. He was making it physically impossible to escape himself. The whole architecture of his home was designed to keep him in his own presence. Your home can do the same thing. It's already trying to. You just have to stop running from it.
Point 5. How to actually do this. Let's get practical, because theory without practice is just entertainment. First, reframe what home means. Home is not the place you crash between real events. Home is the laboratory of your life. Every meaningful thing about you, your ideas, your values, your relationships with yourself, your understanding of the world is built there, not at the party. Second, build a solitude practice, but don't call it that because it sounds insufferable. Just find one activity you do alone, at home, that has no output. Not a side hustle, not content, not productivity. Reading a physical book, journaling, walking slowly, sitting on a chair looking at a wall like a Victorian widow, whatever. The point is that no one is watching and nothing is being produced. Third, kill the input for stretches. Jung didn't have a phone, but you can approximate it. Full-day phone breaks, no podcasts on walks, meals without a screen. Your default mode network needs the runway to take off. It cannot function while you're fire-hosing it with content. Fourth, pay attention to what surfaces. When you actually go quiet, things come up. Grief you didn't process, anger you didn't own, ideas you've been ignoring. This is the shadow work. Don't run from it. Write it down. Follow it. Fifth, accept that you'll be misunderstood. People will call you antisocial. They'll wonder what's wrong with you. Your extended family will worry. This is fine. Jung was called worse. What they can't understand is that you're not withdrawing from life. You're finally showing up to yours. One last story. Jung died in 1961, in his home, in his sleep, at the age of 85. In the days leading up to his death, he told his family he had seen the shape of his own life clearly. He said, "I know and need to know nothing more." Think about that for a second. Not, "I wish I had done more." Not, "I should have taken more meetings." Not, "I regret not going out more." I know and need to know nothing more. That's what a life fully lived from the inside out sounds like. And it wasn't built at the networking event. It was built in the stone tower, in the study, at home. The world doesn't need you to be more available. It needs you to be more you. And the only place that gets built is where you already are. Go home. Stay home. Meet yourself. You'll thank me in a year.